Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
My name is Thompson, the Auditor State Doctor. I've been I have been with them for over 40 years now. So it's been a fun journey. It really has. And I appreciate the opportunity tonight. Focuses tonight is going to give you a general overview of the different categories of fiscal distress for school districts. And I think that's what I was asked to do tonight. Okay. I'm an informal speaker. I encourage questions. I will answer questions that pertain to this oversight that I'm giving. I'm not, and you will see as I go through here that these are not specific to Loveland schools. The information is general in nature and is to be informative as far as what processes there are that's out there. Okay. You were going to make me do a handstand, weren't you? Okay. First thing I want to talk about, these are the four designations for fiscal distress. Precaution, caution, watch, and emergency. Talk first about precaution, if you will. Under precaution, this is something that is totally controlled by the Ohio Department of Education, okay? There is guidance. That guidance can be found in Ohio Compliance Supplement 3301-92-04, okay? 3301-92-04 for those keeping notes. And that isn't the Ohio Revised Code now. That's the Ohio Administrative Code. Ohio Administrative Code. Okay, in there, the Ohio Department of Education has the responsibility to review financial forecasts that are filed each year by the treasurer. Those forecasts, one of them is filed in November, and the other forecast is filed in May. When ODE looks at those forecasts, what they're looking for is whether or not there are low balances in the year that the forecast is being generated for, or if there's deficit balances in year 1, 2, or 3. Okay, if there are deficit balances or the low balance in year 1, then there are some procedures that kick in. Okay, and what happens then is, why don't you, here we go. That's where I went. Oh yeah, during. I'd much prefer during. Yeah, that's a subjective thing, okay? And it's something that again, this is the Ohio Department of Education that makes that determination. And the low balance is going to, I'm sure they're going to take a look, just not at a number out of context, but they're going to take a look at where you have been, okay? And what your forecast is looking like for the future. So if you come in and you have a balance of, say, $10,000, we're just throwing a number out there, and that balance is way out of whack with what you've been carrying over a number of years, then most likely then that they're going to ask you to perform these duties that I'm going to outline for you. So it's not hard and fast. That's a great question, by the way, and I thank you for it. It is subjective, but it's based upon not only what the number is, but where you're coming from and where you may be going as far as your finances are concerned, if that makes sense. Okay. Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. That's why I'm here. So, okay. Okay. There certainly is. Um, I'm going to describe this process for you, and I'm going to be able to answer your question as I go through this. Okay, fair enough? Okay, so the forecast is due on November 30th, the first one for the year, and it's a 5-year forecast of the general fund only. Okay, so we're only talking about the general fund of the district. Now, when ODE looks at those forecasts, and if there is a low balance, they will have communication with the district, okay? It's not, ODE doesn't have blinders on, and they will have dialogue and correspondence with the superintendent and treasurer and board. And then based upon what comes out of those discussions, they may, and this is only for the low fund balances now, they may send out a notification letter in mid-December that will require the board to come up with a written plan, okay? Again, the actual low balance itself is subjective, but if it is something after discussions and dialogue with the superintendent, treasurer, and board, they feel something to move forward on, they will send out the notification letters in mid-December. Okay, my inbox in the middle of December explodes because I get copies of all those letters going out to the various schools where they have to address these deficits in years 1, 2, and 3, and the low balance in year 1. Am I clear to you? Okay, good.
I don't want to cut you off, so we can both ask questions. That was a two-part task. One was the low fund balance. The second part was 3 consecutive years of deficit. Can you just expand on that a little bit? That's if our projections show deficit spending over the next 3 years, or there's some, I mean, we're not getting to a negative balance.
Okay, we're talking about deficits being fund balance deficits. So what we're talking about, if the general fund, not deficit spending now, I get you on deficit spending, but if the fund balance is in a deficit situation in years 1, say we're doing the forecast for this year for FY23. So you're doing forecast for FY23. If there is a deficit in the first year, they're going to be on you quick, and you're going to get a letter quick, and you're going to have to address that situation. If there is not one in year 1, but there's a deficit in 2024, they again will send you out a notification in mid-December, and you will respond back with a written plan as to how that's going to be corrected. And lastly, if there is a deficit in year 3, they will extend the time for the reply back and extend it to February 28th. But it doesn't have to be consecutive. It can be in either one of those first 3 years.
And that's the projected negative balance in our.
Yes, that is correct, sir.
That was going to be my question. You answered my question was, did it have to be triggered by year 1 only, or would they be looking at year 2 and year 3? In other words, if year 1 is not necessarily a deficit or not an extremely low, but then you see a deficit in 2 and or 3, it still triggers it. It's not
That's
that there's
correct.
an expectation that, oh, year 1's okay, you're going to take care of 2 and 3 later. Any year could trigger it. That was my question.
And that's correct.
So
Thank you.
I'm sorry, but one more.
Yeah.
No.
No.
That's all.
It makes my presentation easy. It's good.
Yep. So projected negative balances
Mhm.
can be transitory.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
So you could be negative 1 month and healthy the next month.
Yep.
Is that what we're looking for, or is it?
Well, we're looking at it as of the end of the year. So we're going through a whole cycle. We're going, the forecast that your treasurer puts together for FY23 is going through the entire accounting and education cycle beginning July 1 of 2022 and ending June 30th, 2023.
So I should be thinking about it as a fiscal year-end negative general
There you
fund.
go. That's
Even though it may resolve itself the next month.
okay? If you can resolve it in the next month, then that's going to be part of your dialogue
Right.
with the Department of Education and would certainly be included in the written plan that you will be submitting to them.
Right, okay, got it, thank you.
Okay? Does that make sense?
Yep, sure does.
Okay. The letter that they write back, okay, addressing the issue can take many forms as far as the written plan is concerned. Again, I'm not going to answer it specifically, but what I'm going to say is that the plan can take many forms. It can be reductions of expenditures. It can be enhancements as far as revenues are concerned. It could be a combination of the two. So there are many roads to go down. It just depends on what the board and the officials believe is the best course and how to respond back to the Department of Education.
In other words, the letter would not say, here's what you need to do to fix this. The letter would say, this is a problem, and you need to send us a letter telling us how it's going to be fixed, because ODE can't ask the state for more money for us. ODE can't levy property taxes for us. It would be the district that has to respond to that.
That is clearly correct. The Ohio Department of Education, okay, when they send the letter out, they're sending the letter out in order for you to respond to them and give them a written plan as far as how you expect to address the issue. They're not addressing the issue for you. They're not coming up with the steps to take to enhance revenues or reduce expenditures, but they're telling you that you have to come back at them with a written plan. Now, what happens, and I'm really getting way off, but when you take questions and you open yourself up, you get away from the magic PowerPoint, okay? So it happens. So don't crucify me if I'm away from the PowerPoint for a while. Okay, so the bottom line then is you come up with this written plan. They're going to obviously closely monitor that situation and make sure that plan is in position to correct the issues that you want it to correct. Now, if you are unable, and this occurs, if you get one of those magic letters and you're unable to correct the deficit, or you can't develop a plan that you know, can address the issues, you're unable to, then there is a good possibility then that you would be declared into the next level, which would be fiscal caution. This is all preliminary at this point. Fiscal caution, watch an emergency, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is all in Ohio Revised Code 3316. This precaution thing is coming out of the Ohio code. I'm losing the word. Administrative code. Thanks, Rob. The Ohio Administrative Code, it's coming out of there. It's verbatim. In fact, we just worked on modifying that rule this past year. We jointly sat down with ODE and came up with some new things that we put into that rule.
Dave, as a practical matter, at least for us, and I assume it's probably for lots and lots of districts, our low balance month is not the year-end period.
Yep.
So for us to end up with a negative year-ending balance, we've had all kinds of problems, you know, earlier in the year, typically, long before we ever hit that. Would that be typical for districts that find themselves in this situation?
Well, I don't know about typical, but certainly possible. Okay, and again, precaution is geared more towards looking at things in the forecast at year end. Okay, now if there are certain events that are occurring that may cause problems down the road and may put you into one of the higher categories, then there would be dialogue between you and ODE about those issues.
I'm thinking about the practical situation where we essentially get, you know, 2 slugs of cash during the course of the year.
Mhm.
And, you know, January is typically a low month, right? And then we get receipts and then we start to trip down again. But it seems to me that the serious risk that somebody would have before they get to this threshold is that they find themselves maybe in a January without enough cash.
And that's very possible. Believe me, there are a lot of schools that have situations where they do end up in this mechanism that we put into this administrative rule. It's the same thing that we have on the local government side of the world. When we go in to take a look at what's going on with fiscal distress in local government, we're looking at what's going on at the end of a fiscal year, okay? And that's kind of what the same thing is going on with school districts. Now, if you're saying to me, well, I've got issues during the year and I got low balances during the middle of the year, again, that's dialogue you can have with them if you so desire. But as far as the mechanisms that are set up, as far as these 4 categories are concerned, it's a little bit beyond that.
Right. So the ORC and subsequently the administrative code sets it as the fiscal year end.
Yes.
And the forecasted balances.
That's
the working model.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's the model we have to work with.
Okay.
And that ODE has to work with. Now, again, there's also a catch-all thing in there that if there are extenuating circumstances that are going to cause long-range issues that may place you into one of those more advanced categories, then that's something that, you know, that there would be cause for dialogue for and discussion and potential, you know, resolution. But again, those would have to be problems that in the long run is going to lead you into watch or emergency.
Yeah, at least in the construct that I'm proposing here, you have a number of those instances where you've got a problem in January's and I don't know, one other month, I'll say one other month during the course of the year where you're really in trouble, and then tax receipts show up and you're healthy by the end of the year on paper,
Yep.
right? But you're not healthy.
And I get that.
Yeah.
I totally get that.
Right.
But as far as official
Gotcha.
fiscal distress, again, we're following not to be redundant, but we're following the revised code and the administrative code, and those are gearing up towards year end.
Right. Gotcha. Thank
And
you.
I just want to confirm something that is going to go over into an area that I'm not expecting you to answer or speak to, but what you are speaking to this evening is current Ohio Revised Code and current administration guidelines. And were there to be any legislative changes made to the purview of the ODE, there would have to be corresponding changes to the revised code and the administrative guidelines if that was going to change somehow. In other words, the end of last year, there were some legislative notions that might change the structure of ODE.
Oh.
And if that were to change, it would require a revised code change in order to change what you're talking to us about tonight.
Okay.
Is that correct?
I'm not familiar with that movement, if that's what you're asking me.
Okay.
Okay. Right now, obviously, the parts of this that are in the Ohio Revised Code 3316, those amendments and anything addressing the information in Ohio Revised Code 3316 is coming through state legislators. Okay. Now, if it's Ohio Administrative Code, then that is code that, like I said, that when it comes to 3301, 9204, which is the administrative code that we're talking about with this precaution, those rules are right now being jointly modified by our office and the Ohio Department of Education. So if there's change being made to those rules, that's being done by our two offices currently.
Thanks.
Okay, does that make sense? All right, can we go back 1 minute? Okay, so I think I'm clear that just a brief refresh is the forecasts are due November 30th. The letters go out in mid-December. Years 1 and 2, the written plans are due by January 31st. And if it's a deficit in year 3, it's by February 28th. Now, please note that if you do have deficits in year 4 or year 5, this really doesn't become part because even though your treasurer and the board is professional in putting those numbers together, there's just so many things that can happen between now and then that they're not reacting to deficits in years 4 and 5, that it's limited to the first 3 years. Okay. Let's go one. Yeah, please. Okay, spring projections. Is there any questions before I leave? Anything on written plans or anything? Everybody understand what I'm talking about as far as a written plan is concerned? Okay, spring projections. Again, those are due at the end of May. And really the focus there is on year 2. So if you're putting together your updated 5-year forecast for the spring of 2023, your focus is on fiscal year 2024. And if there are deficits that are being projected for fiscal 2024 and there aren't being addressed in the written plan that you have given them, then there is potential to be declared into fiscal caution. Again, as long as you can develop a plan, and as long as that plan is working and eliminating the deficits that you have outstanding, then as far as these formal declarations under 3316, you can avoid those. That makes sense. Guidelines for declaring fiscal caution. Okay. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, one of the things that we talked about, fiscal caution is the first formal category under 3316. It is the lowest level of distress. It's the ways that you can get yourself into fiscal caution is failure to submit or update a 5-year forecast. So if you're not filing in November or you're not filing in May, you can be declared into fiscal caution. That does happen. Potential current year deficit with acceptable plan in place. So again, this is a situation where you have deficit balances and your plan isn't able to remedy those situations. And in those particular case, you would be declared into fiscal caution. Failure to submit an acceptable written plan within the time frame allowed. And the other two that I want to briefly talk about is if the AOS reports the district did not sign a signed certificate to appropriation measure, that's the 412 certificates. If that process isn't working, then you could be declared in caution. And Auditor State's Office identifies significant deficiencies, material weaknesses in their audit report that may have an effect on the financial condition. The two primary ones that we're concerned about here is failure to file a written plan and having a written plan that isn't working. Those are the two primary ways of getting into caution.
Quick question. Do you have any idea, sort of the numbers of school districts that might, in any given year, be in the level of precaution? I'm pretty sure if you're caution or watch or emergency, that's easy to determine that
Yeah,
districts
caution,
are
watch,
declared
and
that.
emergency are all listed on our website. If you go to our website, and there's a drop down under local governments, and you'll see fiscal distress. And then under fiscal distress, there's two categories, local governments and school districts. And you hit on school districts, and you can get a list of all the current entities that are in watch, school districts that are in caution, watch, or emergency.
Emergency, but the number in precaution would not be listed up there.
No.
Okay.
That's not on our website.
And the last bullet point there, that's not necessarily related to balances, right? That
No.
could be a number of different issues.
It could be, the last bullet point is referring, you get an audit report back and you're not reconciled,
Right.
and you're not keeping financial records. There isn't any sort of budgetary, I mean, for the normal school district, you really don't, you very seldom see those things. I mean, it does happen. Now, on the local government side, in some of our smaller entities, villages and smaller townships, that's more prominent. And there's a lot more going on with that. In schools, for the most part, there are professional treasurers that do not get you into that kind of situation where that would come into play. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you're welcome. Mhm. Yes. Oh, I don't know. That's a very fair question. Why don't, my email address, okay, is DB Thompson @ohioauditor.gov. If you will send that question to me, I will be glad to make a phone call for you. Okay? And I don't pretend like, even after 40 years, if I don't know something, I'm not afraid to come out and say, hey, okay? I'm not going to wing it. Stuff is too important to people. Okay? All right. So we were talking about fiscal caution, and we were talking about ways of getting into it. And then as far as termination is concerned of fiscal caution, that's done by the Ohio Department of Education. They declare you in. There's a mix mash here. That's why I'm going to this extent to explain all this to you, because not all criteria are the same. So if you're going to be declared into caution, it's going to be done by the Ohio Department of Education. And they will be the ones that will terminate caution for you. Some of the things that are important if you do get declared into, if you'll, here we go. This is where I want to be. While you're in fiscal caution, the ODE's responsibilities are they may visit and inspect your accounting and budgetary records. They shall provide technical assistance. They may take recommendations. They may make recommendations concerning the financial recovery plan, and they may determine the district should be in fiscal watch and advise the auditor of state. All right, let's take those, and I'll be brief, because I don't know how much longer you want me to go with this, but you tell me, okay? Shall provide technical assistance. So if you have accounting issues or you have issues as far as how to put the recovery plan together, because there's a format that they provide, so they're a template, if you will, they can answer those types of questions for you. And the other thing they're doing is they're ensuring that you're still continuing to implement your plan that you come up with. The last category is may determine the district should be in fiscal watch. That's only if it comes to a conclusion between dialogue between the two of you that this recovery plan isn't going to correct the issues, the deficit issues that you got in front of you. One of the things that I keep saying to you during this presentation is the dialogue, because there is a lot of dialogue between you and ODE when you get to these phases of precaution and caution, watch and emergency. Again, that's not something that's automatic, but it's certainly something that could occur.
I don't want to get further ahead of your presentation.
It's okay.
But are you going to take us through, we're on
Caution,
always,
right?
we're on caution, and watch and emergency are the next ones, right?
Right.
Are you going to take us through those?
Quickly, if you want, or
Well, let me ask the generic question then, because this is really where I was going. When we talk about a financial recovery plan, the FRP, do you have a sense of what goes in those and, how they might differ between the levels of distress?
Yeah, there's a template or that they will provide, that is provided. Again, in a recovery plan, you're looking for, there's usually some forecasting that's done in that recovery plan, and you're looking for assumptions. You will put written assumptions into those recovery plans and an idea written into those assumptions as far as the savings that you will be generating from either the expenditure reductions or the revenue enhancements, okay? Those are going to be spelled out and they're going to be included in in a forecast type of situation. So basically, it's going to be up to the board to decide what direction they want to head in as far as the plan is concerned, whether it's reduction of expenditures or revenue enhancements. And then once they identify specifically what those deductions or enhancements are going to be, then they obviously get with the treasurer, I think, and make sure that they can put dollar amounts to the savings that are being generated by each one of those, and then plug them into a forecast situation, which will show an improvement as far as the deficit, hopefully an improvement as far as the deficit balances are concerned.
So if you are in a situation where you think revenue enhancement is unlikely because of the track record.
Yep.
The only thing that you're left with in the FRP is expenditure reduction, right?
That's correct.
What you see happening is people just wind that down and wind it down to have a cash balance.
Well, okay, that's a great question. I think the best answer to that is, again, at this point now, the responsibility for the plan is the board's at this point. That changes at emergency level.
Yep.
There's a commission.
But
Yeah, a financial planning commission at that level. You have an oversight body. Doesn't take away from the responsibilities and authority of the board, but there is an oversight body. We are getting way far in advance here. I'll try to reel it back in. But as far as if you're in caution and you're putting together a financial recovery plan, that's a financial recovery plan that you will be submitting to the Board of Ed. I think you have 60 days to do that. And that plan is really the focal point of the healing process, okay? The makeup of it, if all you have left are expenditure reductions, then as a board, you're going to have to decide, how far you want to go with expenditure reductions and whether or not you're going to be able to come up with a written plan to be able to eliminate the deficits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I'm trying to talk, and it's hard not being specific, but
Right, I know you don't want to go specific, and
Yep.
I'm also trying to frame the question as best as I can. You know, I guess I can wonder that people get themselves into the situation by spending more than they should.
Yep.
But given sometimes the overall tax environment, you can get there by just the community rejecting taxes.
well, there are a number of different ways. And again, if you're there, if you're in the deficit situation, again, most people are going to look at a combination of expenditure reductions and revenue enhancements. But if that's not possible, and it all boils down to expenditure reductions, then it's going to be up to the board to identify what those are and how much they believe the community is willing to.
Yeah, so maybe the simplified place I'm trying to get to is if you have a situation where there just isn't, the board doesn't think, the treasurer doesn't think that there's a likelihood of revenue and expenses are whatever expenses are.
Right.
I'm assuming here the state doesn't have some constitutional authority to mandate a tax. I'm assuming that the only people that can authorize a tax of this type is the community.
That's my understanding.
So the commission that you described also has its hands tied to an extent.
That's correct. In other words, to give you an example, and I'll cross over to a city for a second,
Mhm.
but the theory is the same.
Mhm.
Okay. A city not too far from here was in fiscal emergency because of a combination of things. But one of the things is that the citizens wouldn't increase in income tax. And in every right. I mean, that was their beliefs, and so they wouldn't pass an income tax. When they got into fiscal emergency, there wasn't any way in the world that the commission could, force an income tax on those individuals. No way in the world. That doesn't happen. We're still under local control in this state. That's the focus. That's why your authority isn't taken away from you, even though you may be in one of these categories, particularly emergency. You still have your responsibilities and authority as a board to carry out your duties. But as a commission, as that oversight commission, I'm trying to paint a story or a picture for you, is they may not have been able to force an income tax on that community, but they did allow the council in that particular city to put that into their recovery plan, and they allowed them to do that once or twice. And finally, the message got across that maybe this was needed.
So when you're in that situation, you're out of money, bank account zero, you got to operate. Where does magically the money show up from to get you through this time period?
In the case, first of all, are you talking about when you're in a deficit?
Yeah, I guess I'm talking about emergent. Let's talk, it's the easiest one in this sense. If you're in emergency,
Yep.
You've had deficits, you got zero, you've forecasted, and you've been
Yep.
forecasting it long enough that you probably don't have any money left. And you still have to run the town.
Well, the two main criteria for that people fall into emergency in schools, and we're back to talking about schools now.
Okay.
The first criteria is in the previous year, if there was a deficit at the end of the previous year, so if we're in 23, it would be the deficit at the end of 22, and that deficit exceeded 15% of general fund revenues.
Got it.
Okay? 15% of general fund revenues. Or the other way, and the most common way, is failure to develop a recovery plan that when someone is in watch, that would allow them to correct their issues. And that's what we see most often, is a failure for the board to develop a recovery plan. Because again, you have certain requirements that you're required to, fund certain classes and do certain things. You know those a lot better than I do. I'm not even going to pretend all the things you're required to have. And again, if there's not sufficient dollars to cover those things, and you can't come up with a plan, then it gets to the point of you can be declared into fiscal emergency based upon that failure if you're in fiscal watch. So
Maybe I'm asking the impossible question, but I don't know how it gets resolved.
There is,
When you get-
according to the Ohio Revised Code, there is a school district solvency assistance fund.
yeah, there is.
So is that the kind of thing you're?
That may be,
About
that
Maybe.
that is something that is available, has to be paid back.
So it's a loan.
But it answers the question that you had as far as how you get through, if you're already in a deficit and there's not dollars available. That's how you get through, and the treasurer is able to spend dollars, even though you may be, because the influx of the money from solvency assistance will move you, but from a negative to a positive, but it's not the long-term
Not
solution.
sustainable.
No. You still have to, in that situation, you would still have to develop a recovery plan that would not only get you out of a deficit, but you would also have a recovery plan to be able to pay back the solvency assistance.
So I think I hear what you're saying and use the example of that city. But it gets to the point where the public finally says, I got it, and I reluctantly agree to an income tax in that case. And that begins to solve the problem.
It does, or it could. Now, there's all kinds of circumstances and situations. Again, there are many conversations that you will have during that period of time with not only the Board of Ed, but with the commission if you're in fiscal emergency. Your ear's going to be worn out by with the phone calls between those two groups during that period of time.
I'm taking you a little bit farther astray, which I apologize for, but it dovetails into what Kevin's question. Locally, you hear the state has come in and taken over the school district.
Yeah.
What I hear you say is that doesn't really happen. The state will work with the school board to figure out which expenditures need to be cut, keep the school district running at a bare minimum, and lend them money if necessary. But eventually, that money has to come.
Correct. There was a slide to that all the way at the end. Keep going. Keep going. This is a fine organized presentation I got going here. Whoa, there we go. Supervision is not state takeover. Okay? Emphasis, big bold letters. Ohio is a state of local control. The Board of Education is still responsible for identifying the revenue enhancements and expenditure reductions to restore fiscal solvency to the district. The Board of Education will determine all staff and program changes. That's not the state board now. We're talking about the local board. Okay, so again, as I've said three times during this presentation, your authority isn't taken away, nor is your responsibility taken away. It's the idea. I really like the way that state legislature has structured fiscal distress law because there's not a bailout, but there's support, and it's the state will help. It just won't hand you a check. Now there is solvency assistance, but you got to pay that back. That's just a bridge, a bridge to get you so that you can continue to spend. And
I don't know how this actually plays out, but it sounds to me like you're a business and you're about to be insolvent and you work with your bankers on a lending package. They're not going to be shy about telling you what to do.
Well, I said you're going to have many conversations, particularly if you're in emergency.
Right.
That's one. And can I say right now, we have no entities, I don't think, in fiscal emergency for schools at this particular point in time.
Good.
I don't think we do.
Yeah.
I think we took the last one out sometime in 22. We took the last one out.
January 27th,
Yeah.
I think.
We
Nice.
probably have about 10 more minutes for this discussion, so I don't know if there are particular things you wanted to make sure you got to for the rest of
Yeah.
your slides.
Okay.
Hold any other questions at the end, maybe.
Why don't we just do questions?
Could I ask, maybe, could you, I believe you probably have a watch and an emergency slide. If you could just maybe show those and we could just read what it means, what watch.
Okay.
Fiscal watch is
There
and
we
what
go.
fiscal
Stop right
emergency is.
there. Okay. Move forward one. Okay. Fiscal watch, legislation was passed in 1996. Okay, in this I don't have a handout, but declared in forecasted general fund balance, that is wrong information. It's not between 2% and 8%. Okay, it's greater than 8%. So please, it is declared in, if the forecasted general fund balance has a deficit of greater than 8% of general fund revenues from the previous year, in my example I gave you before was, if we're looking at fiscal 2023, then you would take a look at your general fund balance at the end of fiscal 22, and if it was greater than 8%, then you would be declared into fiscal watch. Okay, the other way, and the more common way, is that you've already are in fiscal caution, and you can't develop a recovery plan to eliminate your deficits. And if that occurs, then they're going to elevate you from caution to watch. Okay, now watch, if you go on to the next slide, is declared by the Auditor State's Office. Okay, so watch is declared by the Auditor State's Office. You again will submit a financial recovery plan to ODE within 60 days. School district officials and local boards of education control the financial recovery plan and its implementation. That's a common theme. I said it over and over and over. AOS can provide, if you're in watch, AOS can provide assistance in developing the financial recovery plan, or if you have accounting issues. And school district is removed from fiscal watch by AOS by issuing a non-adverse 5-year forecast. So what we mean by that last bullet is you would remain in fiscal watch as long as you had deficits. And not only do you have to eliminate the deficit for the current year, but you have to have a 5-year forecast that shows no deficits during that 5-year period. Okay? Questions as far as watch is concerned. Declared by our office, you still have to do a recovery plan. It's not terminated until you're able to alleviate the deficits. And if you can't alleviate the deficits, what happens? You get elevated to emergency. Okay? Okay, fiscal emergency. Next slide. Legislation again was passed in 96. Fiscal emergency is declared by the Auditor of State's Office. In this particular case, if the general fund balance at the end of 2022 is greater than 15%, you would be declared directly into fiscal emergency. And the other and the most common way is if you have been declared into fiscal watch and can't come up with a recovery plan. Okay. It establishes a financial planning and supervision commission. I'll talk about the makeup of that in just a second if you want. I got 8 minutes left here. So I got plenty, if I've winged it this far, we're good here. The second bullet is the point that the gentleman over here pointed out on solvency assistance. That is available to you. But please remember, it's not a bailout. It must be repaid. Financial recovery plan, again, in this particular case, you have 120 days to file the financial recovery plan with the commission. And then the commission must approve that plan within the 120-day period. The commission takes a pretty active role in what's in that plan. The final decisions are the board's, but you're going to be getting a lot of input from the Financial Planning Commission. Auditor State's Office will prepare an accounting methods report if you're in fiscal emergency. And what that means is we're going to review all your accounting and budgetary practices and determine if there are any weaknesses and point those weaknesses out. And those weaknesses have to be fixed before you can be relieved from fiscal emergency. And then the whole idea of being in fiscal emergency is to restore solvency and fiscal integrity. Okay, next slide. Here's your makeup of the Planning and Supervision Commission. 5 voting members: the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Director of Office of Budget Management, a parent, a business person, or 2 business persons. That's your makeup of that commission. They're looking for a mix. The first business person is appointed by the governor. The second business person is appointed by the county auditor. Okay? Or the mayor. All right, that's the makeup of the commission. And again, I've taken you through the rest of the slides. You remain in fiscal emergency with, and I can't emphasize it enough, the relationship when you're in caution and watch is extremely different than the relationship you have if you make it to fiscal emergency.
Dave, I just have your site up here, and it looks to me like maybe 30 school districts over the last 20 years have made it into emergency.
Okay.
And you've been doing this for a long time, and I don't know if you can comment on, are there common threads with how districts end up in that state?
Well, one of the things that I will say, and it's not as overbearing in school districts as it is in some of my local governments that I deal with, but the thing I see is maybe lack of planning, and I'm surprised. We budget on a cash basis in Ohio. That's that's been in existence as long as I've been with the Auditor of State's offices. Most of the cities and counties and townships and school districts in Ohio are on they're on a cash basis of accounting, and they budget on a cash basis. And a lot of times the focus is too narrow as far as their planning is concerned. And I think that, the more we have, and again, that's not as prevalent in school districts, but it's still out there. The other thing I see is, well, let me go back to that point for a second. I don't see a lot of long-term planning. I don't see, and this isn't necessarily in schools now. I'm more familiar with the local government side of the world, and the other thing would be in capital planning and being able to deal with replacements, that sort of thing. Those are the types of things that, because obviously if you're making expenditures in one year and you're budgeting on a cash basis, then that cash isn't going to be available for you in the near future. I've seen lack of budgetary controls That certainly weighs in on this. And then in some cases, it's just purely a lack of resources to provide the services that the district wants to provide. Not only the required services, but the ones that you want to go beyond on, that you want to be able to give to your citizens. It's one thing to provide the state minimums as far as classrooms. It's another thing to be able to provide courses and activities and such that people in your community want. So again, there's a challenge in being able to plan and to be able to maintain the level of resources necessary to continue to provide those services that the citizens have come to, in some ways, expect, I think is good.
Let me ask a follow-up question to that. Are there services that the auditor's office provides to school districts who aren't in fiscal emergency to avoid those kinds of problems? How does the auditor's office work with school districts not in emergency status?
That's a good question. That would be, there certainly is the ability to communicate with us and see if there are specific things that we right now, if you're asking me that question, we're providing assistance as far as reconciliations and making sure that people are getting kept up to date as far as reconciliations. We do consulting work as far as budgetary law is concerned and issues. We can discuss reserve balance accounts. There's a lot of use. I'm not sure they're being used here or not. Reserve balance accounts under 570513 that will allow you to set aside dollars for future capital expenditures or payouts of sick leave and vacation and some other things that are available out there. Those are the types of things that we currently are providing. If there's anything specific that you wanted to discuss, then we could certainly do that also. Again, and there is at the watch and emergency levels, there certainly is ability to tap into us as far as being able to answer questions. And those are covered under not with your dollar, but with dollars from appropriations that are
Even better.
yeah.
Maybe, I don't know if this will be a wrap up or not. I don't get to say whether everybody's ready to wrap up or not, but just to continue on the communication line, in general, the Auditor of State communicates with a Board of Education, but it generally comes through the Treasurer's Office.
Yes.
I'm just,
Normally
checking.
that's the case.
Okay, that's what I was,
Normally, our office it's geared more towards the budgetary and the accounting and the compliance side of things, and that filters through the treasurer's office. Not as much communication with the superintendent, although we certainly wouldn't shy away from that.
Last question for me, promise. And you talked about reserve balances. That was really something different, but it triggered this question, which is if you have an observation on best practices for school districts or anybody else in terms of how much cash to maintain on hand.
Yeah, that's a good question. GFOA puts out something. They usually put out, I think it's at 25%, maintaining a cash balance at the end of the year that would cover 25% of your expenditures.
Of your annual expenditures?
Yeah. Again, can I say something?
Yes, please.
That's not always possible, okay? But what you do want to do, and I'll add my 2 cents here, is the board can pass a policy setting an amount that they feel is realistic, okay? And adhere to that and set aside those dollars and making sure that those dollars will carry forward. Maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 10%. You asked for guidance, across the board thing that, and I gave you the GFOA thing.
I just have in my head, I know what I've been told in terms of school districts, kind of a working number of couple of months worth.
Yep.
Which would be less than the 25%, I think, but. then
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
If you can, the whole key is to set a policy and do your best to keep the policy and to be able to keep the balances that are necessary. So that obviously that takes setting down and making the budgetary decisions that are necessary to make sure that with the revenues that you got coming in, that you're going to be able to maintain the balances that the policy sets.
Thank you.
I should be done.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Really appreciate all the information that you provided tonight.
Okay, sorry I
helpful.
changed approach and allowed all the questions
Perfect. No,
as
perfect.
opposed
That was
to
great, thank you.
rolling through a PowerPoint.
I'm just curious, just for my own curiosity and the public, are we putting a time limit on it? Somewhere to be like we scheduled him until 7 or?
No, just because we have additional business, we've given an hour. I just thought that, I mean, if we want to go longer, we can, but
Well, I know there was another question here. I didn't know if other.
To me, I think it's reasonable just to make, if anybody else has questions, but I think that we can only devote so much time to this within the meeting. And I don't want to take this over from you, but I totally understand your question. I wasn't aware that there were.
We don't put a time limit, so I was curious.
It's a public document,
Yeah.
and I have provided it.
Great.
Yeah, you might be able to see what the flow of the PowerPoint is.
and you gave us your
More-
email address so people can follow up with it.
It's on, I think it's, yeah, and again, if they're, particularly if you follow up, please, and I'll be glad to get you an answer.
So Rob, we're going to put it out on board docs as the bottom.
Dave, I'm going to ask one question.
Okay.
I know a lot of conversations happen with the treasurer simply because this is a financial presentation, but
Right.
within it, obviously you have two options. You cut expenditures or you get revenue enhancements, I think is what you call it. But is there guidance in regards to if it has to be expenditure reductions when it comes to public construction, what that would be and what that would look like? At what point are class sizes too high or anything like that? I might not be in your realm there, but I think guidance in regards to when you get to the expenditure reductions, where does that go? I guess is the question.
Well, again, and I hope I understand your question. If I don't, just come back and say,
Sure.
bald guide, I'm not getting it, buddy. Just, I think that as far as expenditures are concerned, again, those decisions have got to be made by the board at what levels they want to be at in certain areas. They have to decide where they're at with capital maintenance. They have to decide where they want to be with additional capital expenditures. They have to decide where they're going to be with the reserve balance. They have to decide what kind of classes and activities they want to be able to provide to the students of Loveland. Okay?
Yep, thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Very,
Thank
very
you.
helpful.
Appreciate it.